Just 1 minute, we'll be bringing a few more chairs in. And we have a public service announcement, very appropriate for the month. Janet Beck, who's been doing the massive job on the bulletin board for diversity and belonging, is going to give us an announcement about the bulletin board.
It's the Med Center Bulletin Board. That's the one that Pat Osborne, Ann Noble, the librarian, and I have been working on. November will be the last month that we're going to do it because we're basically tired. Anyway, but we've been doing it, like this month is Germany, Italy, and the Philippines.
Mike is not working.
It's not working?
Put it right in front of
Okay, like,
Well, you heard me anyway. Anyway, so every month we've done something different. I think we started in February, maybe with Black History. I'm not sure. I don't remember. It was too long ago. Anyway, if you get down to the Med Center or go to the library or go to Plumtree, please check it out next month. It will be Native American. It won't be necessarily one like Osage or Pueblo or Hopi or something. It'll be an assortment. So thank you.
Frankie?
Frankie is a woman of many talents.
Sure is.
well, we are so thrilled to end our final season with a talk, but a very timely topic based on what Janet has said, and just very timely in terms of the movie and the book, and looking back into our past history. We're so blessed to have so many of you that have so many stories to tell. So please don't be shy next year when we're making our list of presentations. So Patricia, apparently, I didn't go to the book club, but I heard she did a fabulous book club about the killing of Flower Moon, and that's how I heard about it when Lori shared with me how well received it was. So Patricia is an Osage, about whom she's going to be speaking.
Put the microphone right up here.
All right. All right, thank you.
Swallow it.
And that would be an Eve's apple instead of an Adam's apple, I guess. So she is an Osage, and she was born and raised in Pawhuska, Oklahoma. She attended Indian Camp Elementary School and Pawhuska High School, so it's in the blood. She graduated from Oklahoma State University. She's worked at Kelly Air Force Base, the Peel Company, Phillips Petroleum, Occidental, Centerpoint, and Robert Half Contracts. And she's been here since September of 2023. She's been very active in some of the cultural and other aspects. So we're really delighted to welcome Patricia to talk about her Osage connections.
Thank you, Frankie, and I want you all to know that this talk is only possible because there was a team helping me, especially Frankie. She knows about all the technology. We did have to bring in Jacob at the last minute. He was our emergency helper. All right. Pardon me while I use my glasses. The reason I'm here today is because of the book club. And here I'm already advancing when I didn't mean to.
Hit escape on your
Point at the computer, yeah.
There. Catherine Beebe is the person who told me about the book club. And I wanted to go to book club because I wanted to meet people and get acquainted. So when I told them that I was from Pawhuska, Oklahoma, and that the movie had been filmed there, they said, great, why don't you do a book review of Killers of the Flower Moon for us? So that's what started this whole project. Before we go any further, I want to recognize I have a couple of off-campus friends here today. Raise your hand, please. Linda Cannon and Sue Beck. Anybody else that came from off-campus? We have some other people over here, so thank you for joining us today. All right, the David Grann book, Killers of the Flower Moon, was the latest to tell the story of the Osage Reign of Terror, but other books have been written about this story. But I thought that the background of the Osage history was important to frame the story, so that's what I focused on today. And I brought my part of my Osage book collection. Let's see how this works. Okay, the most important book, of course, is here on the table, telling the Osage story. David Grann wrote this top-selling book that hit my hometown like a big explosion. He was a staff writer for the New Yorker, and the idea came when he came to Pawhuska and went to the Osage Museum, and he saw a panoramic picture with the center of it cut out. And he asked about who was missing, and that's what led to this book. It became a #1 New York Times bestseller, and then Martin Scorcese wanted to do a movie based on the book. Wrong direction. One of the books I brought is the approved roll of the Osage Indians. I guess I better put my glasses back on. Okay. This book is sitting up here on the table. It's the little yellow book. And it's the roll or the tribal census of the tribe in 1921. So that book is very rare. It was used to distribute land and oil royalties. And the oil royalties were called head rights. So it documents all of the head right shareholders. The next book I'll tell you about this is The Deaths of Sybil Bolton, multiple deaths, because Dennis McCullough Jr., the author, didn't know he was Osage until his mother was on her deathbed. And she told him, I hate to tell you this, but you're part Osage, like it was a death sentence. When he found out that his grandmother had died, first he heard that she committed suicide. And then he was told that she had kidney disease, but she was only about 23. And then he heard 2 other stories from people that were far removed from Pawhuska. So he decided to solve his grandmother's death, and he moved back to Pawhuska, and the book is what happened. Now, how many of you in here have seen the movie? Do you remember seeing this scene for the book cover? It was in the movie, the exact scene. It looks just like this. But it was my first introduction to the Osage Reign of Terror, because I had grown up in Pawhuska in Osage County and had been there until I went off to college. And years later, when I read this book, I realized the impact of the story. But this book was written earlier. The Osage Indian Murders was written by Lawrence J. Hogan, who was an FBI researcher. And when he finished the book, his thought was, the injustices done to the Osages cry out for exposure. And you see Chief Bacon is on the cover. I always recognize him because he wore the same type of hat in every picture that was been taken of him. And there's a quote from him in David Grann's book that says, everybody wants to get in here and get some of this money. He was right about that. And this book is one of the first original books written about Osage history. The author is a very important man in the tribe, John Joseph Matthews. And the copy I brought has a different cover. It's the green cover over there, and the title is The Osages, Children of the Middle Waters. And I also brought a picture of my grandfather, Alex Tinker, reading that book. Oh. Technical difficulties. Grann begins his book with a Matthews quote, showing his reference for this author. And here we have John Joseph Matthews himself. He was a prominent, revered Osage Nation spokesperson and writer, the greatest of the 20th century. He served in the Osage Tribal Council, that he studied at University of Oklahoma, Oxford University, and the University of Geneva. He was also a pilot in World War I. He wrote numerous books about Osage life after he visited with his OU writing professor, who encouraged him to write a history of the Osages, which had not been comprehensively done before that. And that last item, he lived in a stone cabin home called the Blackjacks. And it's now part of the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve, which is north of Pawhuska, a few miles. So he's living, his cabin was out among the wild animals and the grasslands and bluestem of Osage County. All right, here is perhaps my favorite book, and I really drew from this to find out the story of my family. The man you see in the costume here is Lewis F. Burns, and he is called by David Grann as the eminent historian of the Osage. And he wrote Turn of the Wheel, which everyone in my family has either access to it or wish they had access to it, because it shows the Burns Tinker genealogy, and especially the Tinkers for 400 years. And my mother was a Tinker, so it was very precious to us. And it begins with John Tinker, born in 1622, so in Yorkshire, England. So unless you're on Ancestry.com and know what your lineage is, this book is just very important to us. And his research papers can be found at the White Hare Memorial in Ralston, Oklahoma. And it documents my ancestry through 11 generations, and I'm in generation 11. And there are a lot of people that came after me, so they need an update. This is the only book that I have, and the only book I could find, that talks about the Osage ceremonial dances. And there are many pronunciations and spellings of the dances, but we always called it Ilanchka, or the dances, which is much easier. It literally means playground of the eldest son. And the dances are still held annually, and it encapsulates tribal culture, customs, and beliefs. It doesn't want to do this. Oops, wrong button, sorry. All right, now we get to my family. This book is The Osage General, Major General Clarence L. Tinker, by James L. Crowder. Well, now it's Dr. Crowder. Dr. Crowder was the Tinker Air Force Base historian, and he had a lot of curiosity about General Tinker because he attended a conference that talked about various Indian leaders, and several of the facts about General Tinker were wrong, and he wanted to right those wrongs. So he set about interviewing people and finding out about the general and writing this book. His secretary typed the book. This is before the computer. She typed the manuscript so well that she became an expert on General Tinker. And General Tinker was the first Native American to reach the rank of Major General in World War II. He had quite a career, and Tinker Field was named in his honor. The next book, I brought it. It's sitting on the table underneath the roll book, and it has Chief Pawhuska on the cover, on the back cover of it. I didn't realize that until I turned it over one day. All right, I wanted to tell you about the meaning of some Osage words. Osage is the English pronunciation, but in town they call it Washashi or Wajashi. I've noticed they have a hard Z that's appearing more and more in some of the words they use. Or they abbreviate it WZZ. Wakonta or Wakanda means the Great Spirit. And Pawhuska, for Chief Pawhuska, literally means white hair in Osage. And he got the name because he was in a battle with some soldiers, and he found a soldier that he wanted to take a trophy from. He was going to scalp him. So he grabbed the man's hair, and it came off in his hand. So it was a white wig. So he just put it on his own head and wore it around. So everybody started calling him White Hair. And that's the name of the White Hair Museum where those books are stored. The French traders lived with the tribe from the time they lived in Missouri and Mississippi and made their way to Kansas. So there is a lot of French influence on the tribe, and a lot of French names made their way into the family trees. The role of the Catholic Church cannot be understated. The Catholic Church helped the tribe. The tribe was integrally involved with the church. They educated the children. They established a different naming convention for tribal members because up to that time they did not carry their father's name. But the Catholics realized that that would be very important. So they changed the naming convention so that the father's name carried through. Otherwise we would not have things like the turn of the wheel that tracked through all those years of ancestry. And they kept historical records. They kept records of all the birth, marriages, and deaths. And maybe divorces too. Because there were lots of those, as you'll find out. Right now there are about 24,000 tribal members spread throughout the world. But there are only 5 living full-bloods, and none of them feel very well right now. And none of them are childbearing age. So when those 5 go, that's it. All right, where have I put my little doodad? My page turned, there it is. All right, now we're going to talk about Osage culture. The Ilanchka, the ceremonial dances, are the most important of all Osage customs. It's a 4-day annual event, and you see this man is dressed to go into the arbor. A drum keeper is designated for each location that they have it, and they have it in 3 locations, Pawhuska, Hominy, and Gray Horse. And the drum keeper is always a firstborn Osage son. So the drum keeper at Gray Horse this year is the son of the woman who is the editor for the Osage News. The music that you would hear at Ilanchka is provided only by the drum, a single drum with players all around it, and singers, mostly men, and bells that are on the regalia of the tribesmen. And it is largely about the men. The men dance first, and they're danced at the invitation of the whip man. And there's a whole ritual that I don't understand, but I know where to find out the details. It's in that book, Alice Callahan. And Ilanchka was portrayed in the movie's last scene, where all the dancers are dancing, and it's being filmed by a drone. But let's start at the beginning for the Osage. Let's get the real history behind us. The beginning was in 700 BC was the earliest record of the Osages, but they were part of a bigger tribe called the Siouan-Daejean tribe. And as they moved westward in their migration, the tribe split into multiple tribes, but they all started together, and that's why some of their music and some of their rituals all sound very similar. Their ancestral territory extends from Pennsylvania to Kansas, Wisconsin to Louisiana. So you see what a powerful tribe they were and what has happened to them, because that little purple square in the middle in Oklahoma is where they settled into Osage County. I think this is the picture of what happened to them. from these vast lands to little tiny Osage County. On the migration to Kansas, that was an important part of the story because in the 1800s, the Osages ceded 100 million acres of ancestral land through treaties with the U.S. government. 100 million. In 1847, the Osages settled by treaty in southeastern Kansas. The time in Kansas was documented in this book, Little House on the Prairie. I watched that TV series when I was a child. It never clicked with me it was the Osages. It wasn't obvious. But I did learn a lot from it. And the lesson I learned was, make do with what you have. Dennis McCullough, who wrote The Deaths of Sybil Bolton, described it as the little house on the Osage prairie. However, he gave a scorching review of white settlers' brutal treatment of the Osage tribe. Because even though they had negotiated for the land, they had gained the land by treaty, bad things were happening to the tribe, and the peacekeepers paid no attention to it and allowed it to happen. So when they got enough of it, they decided they had to move on. So they made one last move to Indian Territory. And here's how that happened. In 1865, they sold the Kansas reservation for $10 million held in trust. And the term in trust means they didn't get it in their bank accounts. The Indian Territory land was purchased from Cherokee, the Cherokee tribe, for 70 cents an acre, and they got 1.4 million acres. So they went from 100 million to 1.4 million acres owned by the tribe. The tribal trust was rationed to force the tribe to walk the white man's road. Those are the words of John Joseph Matthew. Walk the white man's road. That's part of the title of one of his books. So the final and permanent home of the Osage people became Osage County. And you can see in this map, Pawhuska is here, Hominy, Fairfax. That's sort of the triad of where the tribe settled down. But Pawhuska was the central part. And that's where the Osage Nation Council is now. But good news happened, at least partially good. Oil was discovered on the Osage lands, and the first commercial productive oil well was drilled in Bartlesville, Oklahoma in 1897. Bartlesville is 28 miles from Pawhuska. But in the movie, it portrays it as the oil was seeping from the ground, and that's how they discovered there was oil. And an enterprising driller decided he was going to make things happen, so he jumped in there and got a bunch of lease land so he could produce the oil from the Osages. Now here comes a really good story. This is Chief James Bigheart. And he realized that if the Osage had all this land and oil had been discovered, they were going to be able to sell that and make a lot of money. So he teamed up with attorney John Palmer, and John Palmer wrote out in longhand the Allotment Act of 1906 that was finally approved by Congress. And it had two types of things it was allotting. One was the land, which maintained, the Osage maintained communal ownership of subsurface mineral rights, which has come in handy a few times since then. The land allotments were assigned only to Osage tribal members, avoiding the land rush that was happening with the other tribes. Because you've heard about the Sooners and the land rush with everyone trying to get their stake in the ground so that they would have some land. Well, the Osage didn't allow that on their lands. The funds were assigned oil and mineral royalties via head rights to tribal members. So they had to take a census, and that's where the roll came in. But notice that on the bottom of the page, Osage County, the entire county is the Osage mineral estate. Estimated value, $4 billion for the oil beneath the surface. So in order to know how to pass out the money, they took the tribal roll, did a census, and you had to go and sign up at a certain location. When they finished, as that little yellow book will prove to you, the census totals were 2,229 plus one white man. We don't know where he was in there, because the total is 2,230 in my book. Okay, so the head right, the share of oil and mineral royalties, would be doled out based on whether your name was in that book. And your land allotment, 657 acres in Osage County, give or take a few. What they did was they took the 1.4 million acres and divided by 2,229. But currently, only 25% of the head right owners are owned by non-Osage entities. So through the years, the head rights have slipped through their fingers by one means or another. So now we're going to talk about my family. My dad was a Soderstrom, my mother was a Tinker. She was the Osage in the family. So the Soderstroms, when they came to America, they were living in Jönköping, Sweden. Sven and Anastina came with all their family. They settled in southern Kansas, likely on Osage lands. Their firstborn son, you can see him, the tallest one in the back with the blue arrow, that's John, my great-grandfather. And here we have John, all grown up and with his own wife. He married Laura Coffey, whose father was Major Coffey, and that's how Coffeyville was named, Coffeyville, Kansas. They had 6 children. Their family moved from Kansas to Pawhuska in the 1870s. And John went into business with Osage man William Matthews, who was very influential in the tribe. And he was father to John Joseph Matthews. So that was our first connection to the Osage tribe. My grandfather Floyd is the youngest child on the lower right. The child next to him was his brother Evan, and the two of them married the Conley sisters. So all of their children were double first cousins. My dad was very proud of that. Also, Evan lived to be age 100, and he was the first white child born in Indian Territory. All right, I skipped a generation because Floyd and his wife Rosie, I don't have any pictures of them. Rosie died when she was 27, leaving 3 orphaned sons, including my dad, who was the oldest. Floyd's son, my father, was named Joseph Floyd Soderstrom, and the Joseph was for John Joseph Matthews, although it could have been for a couple of other Soderstrom relatives named Joseph also. He married Sarah Jane Tinker, a beautiful Osage woman. He leased Osage bluestem grassland from Chief Fred Lookout for his cattle business, and he and the chief had to do their negotiations behind closed doors so they could talk in English, because the chief only spoke Osage in public. And here we have my whole family. This is the last picture taken of all of us together. I was home on vacation in 1981, and there's my brother, and he's holding Holly, the cat, Sarah Jane, mother, and there's Daddy on the end. And there are only 3 Osages in this picture. Mother, my brother, and me. Holly and Daddy are not Osage. And I wanted you to see this picture just so we're really authentic Osage baby board. With me on it, I don't look very happy. I think the sun was in my eyes. And there's Mother looking after me. And there's another picture that I have that has her father holding me the same way. And oh, by the way, Mother attended St. Louis boarding school. You've heard about boarding schools in Oklahoma, but she had a pretty positive experience there. And here's my handsome brother, Joe. He showed his Osage heritage with his height of 6'4". He was always the tallest boy in his class, especially on the basketball team. He and I both went to Indian Camp Elementary School, which was established to teach the children of the actual Osage Indian camp. But there were other people there too, if they lived in that neighborhood. However, no Osage history or language was taught. There was no mention of the Osage Reign of Terror. I never heard a peep about it the entire time I lived there, till after I moved away. So it was a forbidden subject. Now this, I've been thinking about this home. I got this picture from my cousin Patricia Tinker, who's a cardiologist, and one of his patients brought in a whole group of pictures of homes that he had built, because he was a developer, and he built this home where we lived. We leased the Lookout Place. It was 5 miles east of Pawhuska on a dead-end road. We leased it for 16 years. The house was later sold, renovated, and then burned to the ground in 1981, and there's not a brick left. It's so sad to go back and see it now. But it didn't look like this when we moved in, because the owners, the Lookouts, were not wanting to go inside the house. They felt it was haunted. And the house was abandoned and had been for years when we moved in. So my dad had to tame the yard, which was about 4 feet tall with weeds. And that's what it looks like again today. But the day after this house burned, my brother died of leukemia in a Tulsa hospital. So I connected the two. But there were happy times too. We had a dinner party at the Lookout Place. At least Mother Daddy did. Guess who's coming to dinner? Joe Matthews. Joe Matthews and his wife Elizabeth came. Mother was an excellent cook, and in 1964 she and my dad hosted a dinner party for Joe and Elizabeth Matthews. After the dinner, my parents received a thank you postcard with an artful illustration of each dish on the menu that night. Joe Matthews wrote, "No ancient king ever enjoyed such a wonderful variety of perfectly prepared food, an evening of congeniality and feasting we shall never forget." That card remained one of my mother's most prized possessions. And you can see she made dill bread. We had mountain oysters, pheasant, quails, cheese peas, because there's a Jolly Green Giant. And then this is a rice field. Wild rice. Mother had a fabulous recipe for wild rice that's still being used today. So it was just wonderful to know that they all enjoyed that time together. I was at school. Okay, now we're going to move on to more of my Tinker's family. We finished the Soderstroms now, and I had my cousin called me recently and said, "Who was the first Osage in our bloodline?" And I said, "Oh, I don't remember. I know I have it somewhere. I'll have to call you back later." So eventually I found it, but I also did a bunch of research on it. So here's the result, and I think you'll enjoy this story. George Tinker, and I found this in Turn of the Wheel, the blue book up here. George Tinker was born in 1813. He was the tribal blacksmith and gunsmith, so he was very vital to the tribe. He married 3 Osage women, one after the other. But there were years in between. The first one, here comes the French influence, Lucretia Lachapelle, had 6 children, and one of her grandsons became chief of the tribe. So she died after 20 years, but I have to back up a little bit. Lucretia was 15 when she married George, and they were at the Osage Mission, Kansas. I think now it's called St. Paul. And the priest would only let her marry him because they thought she was an orphan, because they thought her father had been killed in battle. Turns out he wasn't. But anyway, George got to marry her, and they had all those children. So after she died, years later, he married Pelagie Mowbray. So here's a story. During the hunting season at Osage Mission, Pelagie left George at camp and went out with a hunting party. She fell ill on the hunt, and the group left her and returned to camp, telling George that Pelagie was dying. Believing her deceased, George married Jane Rebar. And they had a son named George Edward. Then Pelagi returned to the camp, also with a son, Joseph Cyprian, born in the same year. Neither woman lived with George again. But Jane Rebard has a lot of stories. Jane Rebard was, I found a note that my mother had handwritten in the roll book that she was christened as Mary Genevieve Rivard, with a French name that was changed to Rebard later. She didn't go by Mary or Genevieve, she went by Jane. So I tried to call her Jane Rebard through here until later when she married so many fellows. George was her 4th husband. John Conway was her 5th husband. So, you know, women with children didn't want to stay single because they needed a protector and they needed someone to put a roof over their head. So that's the reasoning I'm going with. And here's Jane. Isn't she garlic? I think the sun was in her eyes. But she is the first and only Osage in my line. So no one in my line ever married another Osage. She's the one and only Jane. Married to George Tinker and 1 son with George Edward. The man in this picture is John Conway, her last husband. But this is the only remaining picture I have of her. It's when my mother moved to Houston, all of her pictures sort of evaporated, except a few. Now, I found this picture and I had to include it at the last minute. This is a stained glass window in the local Catholic church in Pawhuska. And I thought that Jane Conway had donated the money for this window, but it is donated by someone else in her memory. This is about a 30-foot window, and it's on the altar of the Immaculate Conception Church, which is also called the Cathedral of the Osage. If you go to Pawhuska, that's what they refer to it, because living Osages were used in the stained glass window, and they had to get permission from the Vatican to do that. And here's George Edward, whose mother was Jane Rebard Conway. He grew up and became my great-grandfather. I'm so happy for that. He was the publisher of the first Osage newspaper. He married Sarah Swaggerty, who had 10 children by him. And I'm wearing Sarah's bracelet on my arm today. I never met her. She was gone long before me, but it was passed down to me through my mother. George Ed and all of his 10 children were original allottees. So he was the famous father of Clarence Tinker, and my father, grandfather Alex Tinker, and a lot of other important Tinkers. They were a very close family. Here's another picture I found. This is very rare. This is Julia Lookout, wife of Chief Fred Lookout, who's next, and then George Ed Tinker, the tribal advisor, and then another family friend, Clarabelle Shaw, who was the tribal translator. But I thought you ought to see that. Now we go down to the next generation, Alex Tinker, George Edward's son, and his family. He was my grandfather. He's the one reading the Osages over there in the picture. He married Nadine Boyer, and they had 5 children, including mother. They moved the family to Colorado in the 1920s, avoiding the Reign of Terror. So, to me, he's an Osage hero. And then here's another Osage hero. I have great stories about him. Major General Clarence L. Tinker. His father was George Ed. After a storied career in the Army and Air Force, in 1941, he was appointed commander of the 7th Air Force in Hawaii after Pearl Harbor. In 1942, he was lost at sea after leaving Midway to lead an attack near Wake Island. Posthumously awarded a Distinguished Service Medal, and they bent the rules and named Tinker Field in Oklahoma City for him in his honor. He's honored annually at Elanchka in Pawhuska on the last day of the dance with his own special song. But I also picked up that book that James Crowder wrote about him, And I found 2 instances where he was in a plane crash, and his sister had a premonition that something had happened to him. The first plane crash, he was on a training flight with a pilot who had to practice takeoffs and landings, and when they landed, the plane crashed, and fire came out, and General Tinker was able to get out of the plane, but he went back in to pull the pilot out who was strapped in and couldn't get out. He went back several times until he finally got the man out, and his face was burned in the effort, but he was awarded medals for that. The second crash was when he was lost at sea, and his sister, Villa, just had a strong premonition, and she was having a dinner party that night, and she asked her guest, a girlfriend of hers, to spend the night because she didn't want to be alone. She knew something horrible was happening. And then later in the evening, she said, "I know it's my brother. There's something wrong." And at 3 in the morning, she said, "It's over now. He's either dead or he's all right." But it turns out he was lost at sea. And here's the best part of my presentation. My mother, her father was Alex Tinker. She was born on leap year day on the Osage allotment land near Ralston, Oklahoma. I wanted to mention that she received a check from the Cobell lawsuit settlement due to owning a headright. And if we have time, we will cover more about the Cobell lawsuit, is one of my last slides. She also served the tribe at a low-income housing project. But she was very popular with the tribe. They invited her to a lot of their meetings because they knew she would bring half a dozen chocolate pies. I also have another younger cousin. Philip Henry Tinker was working for a law firm that got a case that went before the Supreme Court called McGirt versus Oklahoma. The Supreme Court decision means that the crimes committed by tribal members on tribal lands must be prosecuted in federal or tribal court depending on the offense. So he's very proud of being involved in that case. And I also wanted to mention that Randy Catherine Tinker Smith is director of the Osage Ballet that's mentioned in Grant's book. And she lives in Skytook, which is quite a distance from Pahuska, but she drives in to teach young Osage girls ballerina skills. And we have to call her Randy Catherine because her husband's name is also Randy Smith. To summarize the Tinkers, each generation has gone further than the previous. Education and careers in medicine, law, engineering, music, business, government service, and the U.S. military. We're an industrious group of folks and proud of our Osage heritage, even though it might be tiny. Our Tinker family is resilient, hardworking, and fun, and we have a great time when we're together. And you will be meeting my cousin Jim Tinker when he comes to town, because last time he came, he helped somebody with their groceries. It took a while to come to my unit. All right, now we'll go on to the book. How are we doing on time?
15 minutes.
15 minutes, okay. We have, this is David Grann. He was published, Killers of the Flower Moon, in 2017 after 5 years of research. And to summarize the book, after oil was discovered on Osage lands in 1897, Bartlesville, the tribe became the richest people per capita in the world. But then mysterious murders began. After the death toll reached more than 24, the tribe asked the FBI to investigate. It was their first major homicide case. Now here's something I don't think anyone will know about. Garrett Hartness is a friend of mine we're working on some projects together, and I sent him an email recently, and I told him that I saw his name in Grant's book, that he was being quoted. And so he sent me an email, a long email. He said that he provided Mr. Grann with access to his own 5 years of research of newspaper articles about the Reign of Terror. And then at the end of the email it says, "I was happy to have helped, had no idea that the book was going to be all that it was, then the movie, and the aftermath. I consider it my greatest achievement." And in the book, it's in 3 sections: the marked woman, the evidence man, and the reporter. So I just wanted to define what the flower-killing moon means. It's the last full moon of spring. Why David Grann used that as his title, I have no idea. You'll have to ask him. Molly Burkhart was targeted for her family's head rights, and there were a lot of women in her family, so it made it easy for William Hale's relatives to marry into the head right business because there were women that would be easily swayed. Molly was assigned a guardian to manage her financial affairs due to incompetency. So what does incompetency mean? Congress passed a law that required the Osages to prove that they could handle their reserves responsibly. They didn't trust them to be able to make financial decisions. If they couldn't, they were declared incompetent and appointed a guardian. Osages were considered wards of their guardian. It was a status that was usually given to full-bloods like Molly. And I will say that that competency-incompetency rule is still in effect, but no guardians are being done. Now, this is a story that was in Grant's book, and he did it because it's colorful, and I'm going to do it for the same reason. Chief Wachianka of the Osage was sent to Washington, D.C. to talk to the Indian Affairs Commissioner about the ration system, which was causing the tribe to starve. Remember when they were being influenced to try to walk the white man's road? Well, they were withholding so much that the tribe was starving. So when they got to Washington, the commissioner tried to get out of the meeting, but the very tall chief blocked his path and let go of his blanket. He was naked, except for a breechcloth and moccasins, and his face was painted. He told the man to sit down. After a lively discussion with the delegation, the commissioner agreed to end the ration policy. Then Chief Wachianka picked up his blanket and said, "Tell this man it is all right now. He can go." I hope every Osage child hears that story. On to the second part of Grant's book. You notice we're doing very high-level book review here. The Evidence Man. I got this, I think it was a very rare picture of J. Edgar Hoover with Tom White 100 years ago. J. Edgar Hoover assigned Tom White, a former Texas Ranger, to the case. Tom was asked to find an unbroken chain of evidence. The FBI team went undercover to find it, and it took them years. Eventually, they caught up with William Hale, king of the Osage Hills, and he was convicted for the murders in Molly Burkhart's family. The FBI closed the case after the Burkhart murder convictions and a few others. The last section of the book was the most consequential, in my opinion. Here's David Grann talking to someone about the book. So, the way I talked about it in the book club, I said, after 5 years of research, Grann linked William Hale to the Burkhart murders. He also single-handedly solved the brutal murder of the local attorney, W.W. Vaughn, who was thrown from a train. W.W. Vaughn had gathered evidence about the murders, and he was going to take his evidence and show it to someone, but before he had a chance to do that, he was murdered and thrown from the train. They found him wearing only his boots. And they enlisted the Boy Scout troop to look for him. Boy Scout troops started in Pawhuska, in case you didn't know. So David Grann was asked to investigate one more murder. Mary Jo Webb was an Osage woman who wanted him to investigate the death of Paul Peace, her grandfather. And in doing that, he went to the Federal Archives in Fort Worth, and he ran across the Osage Guardian Logbook, which was written in longhand. The result was that the book listed the guardians, their wards, and the number of dead, revealing the wide scope of the problem. The result was many more murders remained not investigated and not solved. So when he told Mary Jo Webb what he had found, her reaction was a biblical reference. The blood cries out from the ground. So I found this C-SPAN presentation done by David Grann with his conclusions on what he found doing research for the book. Congress passed legislation for guardianship in the 20s, creating a criminal enterprise which created the culture of killing by ordinary people. The killings were ongoing in separate families. There was a conspiracy of silence. There were many willing executioners. Collectively, a mass killing. So along comes Martin Scorcese, and he wants to tell the story of Killers of the Flower Moon. And on his first trip to Pawhuska, he had a meeting with Chief Standing Bear, and you show the two of them on the right-hand side. This meeting changed the point of view of the script to ensure that the depictions of the Osage people and culture were as true as possible. And it was truly portrayed the Osage lifestyle, food, dishes, clothing, jewelry, and language. So he accomplished that. When I went to Pawhuska for a family gathering, the downtown Pawhuska had changed into a movie set. They had put dirt all over the street, the main street downtown, so it looked like an old-timey place where the old buggies would be driving. The local Osages became movie extras, and Everett Waller, who at the time was the chairman of the Osage Minerals Council, had an unscripted speech that he just spoke from the heart, and that was used in the movie. The final scene portrayed Elanchka with the drone view of all the dancers. And that scene was filmed after the movie was finished. They packed up the crew and all the equipment had left, and then they came back to film that one scene. The movie premiere at Cannes Film Festival received a 9-minute standing ovation. So it was well received there. And here, I just love this picture, so I had to show it to you. The Osage News editor is Shannon Shaw Duty, whose son was the drumkeeper at Grey Horse this past year. She told the Killers of the Flower Moon movie story as it unfolded, and I have a lot of her editions of the Osage News up here. Shannon's Osage ensemble was custom made for her by her mother. And you look at the jewelry, the sea bead necklace, that's very typical, and the brooches. Lily Gladstone in the movie wore 2 silver brooches, and that's very typical of the Osage dress. And Shannon said when she was invited in to actually view the premiere from the front row, she said it was a thrill of a lifetime. And then the movie got 10 nominations for Oscars, and they invited them to come and play the song that was created for that last scene in the movie where the drone was showing the dancers. That song was written by one of the tribal members, especially for the movie. So here you see the Osage singers and dancers. And Shannon Shaw Duty said that she got chills when she heard the bells announcing the arrival of the tribe coming on the red carpet. But while these people were in Los Angeles at the Oscars, the Pawhuska Osage Casino had an Oscar watch party, and everybody dressed up, and they had a formal dinner, and then they watched from the giant screens in the casino, and they cheered when their drummers and the singers came on. Okay, the aftermath of the Killers of the Flower Moon. Molly Burkhart regained her competency, made her own decisions, remarried, and settled in the Grey Horse camp. She lies at rest in Grey Horse Family Cemetery with her murdered family. Scorcese commissioned someone to write Killers of the Flower Moon, the making of the movie. I tried to find it on Amazon. It's not there, so I don't know how to find it. A century later, we still don't know the full stomach-churning extent of the Osage murders. So that's sort of the wrap-up, but I have a couple more I wanted to talk to you about. I went to elementary school at Indian Camp with Mokri Lookout. Now he goes by Moog. Moog and a few other people created the Osage alphabet. The Osage did not have a written language. It was only spoken. So all their stories have been handed down since 700 BC by by talking to the family and telling the stories. But now they have their own alphabet. Mowgli is a full-blood Osage language teacher. He created the alphabet, and he's the foremost expert on Osage language in the world. So in 2016, the alphabet he created was added to Unicode. So now you can choose that on your computer and read and write in Osage. So that is a huge accomplishment for the tribe. So after that was over, Kansas State, where he was working as a language teacher, gave him an honorary doctorate, and he delivered his remarks in Osage. On legal matters, I'd love to tell you this story. This is a picture of President Obama shaking hands with Eloise Cobell, who's another Osage hero. Although she's not Osage, she went into her local Bureau of Indian Affairs office and said, "I'd like to know how my account got the balance." She had an individual Indian money account, which is what they call the headright accounts. And a lot of tribes have income coming in like that, all handled out of Albuquerque. Anyway, the people in her office couldn't tell her how there was any transaction. There was not a transaction history of where the account balance came from. So she brought a class action lawsuit against the government for U.S. mismanagement of Indian trust funds. It settled for $3.4 billion. In 2010, President Obama signed the settlement law because he was tired of having it linger, and it had been in the courts for about 12 years. 1.5 billion went to the 300,000 IIM account holders, including my mother, and 1.9 billion to buy fractionated interests in trust lands. Does anybody want to tell me what fractionated interests are? Okay, the original allottees had 657 acres. If they had 10 children, the next generation got 1/10 of that, so they might have 65 acres. If they had 10 more children, they'd have 6 acres. So it becomes negligible. So that they call them fractionated. So they could buy those fractionated interests and put them back into the tribe. And here we have, this is my last slide, status of the Osage mineral estate. And some of you may love oil and gas, and some of you may not be happy that it's a fossil fuel and it's ruining the earth. However, drilling in the Osage has slowed to a trickle. The drilling permitting process is very over-regulated. The BIA is very slow to issue new drilling permits. We recently had 4 permits approved and everyone was cheering. The existing well records need to be digitized and made accessible to the drillers, and the BIA is holding them hostage, so they're not cooperating. The BIA needs proper environmental training to deal with wells that need to be tapped, and that hasn't happened, and I don't see it coming anytime soon. We also need U.S. congressional support to administratively manage head rights. If you had a head right and you wanted to give it back to the tribe, there's no way to administratively do that. So changes need to be made. However, the thing holding us up is this generational dilution, those are my words, of shareholder head right. Just like the fractionated land, the fractionated head rights, by the time it's gone through 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 generations, you see there's not much left, and my cousin calls her share lunch money. All right, that's the end of my prepared remarks, and I would love to take questions if anybody has any questions.
Are the Elanchka ceremonies open to the general public?
Yes, Elanchka is open to the public, but it's sort of a closed society at Elanchka. Elanchka has, there are several things that happen in Elanchka because the dancers are there for 4 days. Their family dresses them. It takes up to 2 to 3 hours to dress a dancer for the dances. And so they serve food to the family. So my Tinker family partnered with another family, and they would take turns throughout the dance Kansas in Pawhuska. So one family would cook and wait on the other family and clean up the dishes, and the next day, the reverse would happen. So when people come, the Osages are sitting on named benches. So there is a Tinker Soderstrom bench that my cousin sees about. And so that's where we know we can go and sit. There's not really a lot of open seating for visitors, so many of the townspeople don't come. But considering the history with the townspeople, I don't think you could blame them for not coming. Because after the FBI left and the Burkhart murders were over, everybody went back to business as usual. You were dealing with murderers that nobody ever caught or investigated, and you just pretended it didn't happen and you went about your business. Anybody else?
Lily Gladstone won the Golden Globe for her portrayal in The Ghost of the Power Moon. She's not Osage, as I understand it. Do you know if they looked for an Osage actress to play that role?
I don't know what the casting people did, and there was kind of a little bit of an outcry when Lily Gladstone was chosen, but by the time the movie finished, they consider her her sister. They love her. They thought she did a wonderful portrayal of Molly Burkhart, so there's no distance between the Osages and Lily. They love her.
Patricia, where, on the family tree, where in your family tree did the Osage first appear?
Jane Rebar.
The yellow
The yellow part is the Osage.
Jane Rebar, okay.
When George Tinker married Jane Rebar, that was his third wife,
Got it.
he did not have any Osage, even though he lived with the tribe. There's no record of that. And the way to tell is to look at the roll book. If your name is in that roll book, we know you're Osage. Jane Conway is the name that she had in the roll book, but she was already deceased by 1921. So I don't know whether her descendants got any money or head rights. I don't know how that works. There are a lot of question marks in that roll book, I'll put it that way. Anyone else? Yes.
So Patricia, you talked about Pelagie, who was George's second wife. She went hunting and they left her for dying. So the woman went out hunting, or was it just because she was Indian, she would go out with a hunting party?
It was a group. It was a hunting party that went out together. Now, why they didn't recognize she was pregnant, I don't know. Maybe she had on a rather large Osage dress.
But did women go hunting? I mean, why wouldn't they have taken a man instead of women? Were women?
Oh, both men and women went on the hunt.
I see. Okay.
And they were hunting bison, buffalo. And in the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve now in Pawhuska, there was a big push to bring the buffalo back. So many years ago, they invited one of our military leaders, whose name I can't remember right now, to a ceremony there. They made him an honorary chief, and they released 300 buffalo into the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve. And now they have to prune them because they'd be taking over. So the buffalo still live. But back in the days when they were living in Kansas, the attitude of the Army was a dead bison equals a dead Indian. So they were there were millions of buffalo in Texas. They were all eliminated to get rid of the Indians.
And then you said that they had to get special permission to name the base after Tinker, same as they had to get permission from the Catholic Church to put Osage in the windows. Is that simply because they were not were not American, quote? Is that why?
No, for the church, they had a rule against using living persons in the windows. So they had to get special permission for that. And for the Tinker Field naming, they usually like to wait several years before they honored someone. And they made an exception in this case and did it right away when he was lost at sea. He was a good friend of Hap Arnold who made that happen. I think he could have been in Eisenhower's cabinet if he had lived. He was a take charge guy. He walked into the room and everybody knew it. He was in charge, and his men loved him, and unfortunately lots of women did too. But Tinker men are pretty attractive. Okay, yes.
I think I read recently that there are like 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States, tribal nations.
Wow.
Yeah. Do you have any idea the Osage in terms of numbers, where they are? I think
Well,
I read the.
I know we have 24,000 members that are enrolled in our tribe, and we carry a card that says the Certificate of Degree of Indian Blood. I think there's no other race that has to prove how much they are of anything. You don't ask them how much English are you, how much French are you, but for the Osage, we know exactly how much we are because we have to prove our lineage, and they have records at the agency. Not saying the agency is perfect, but they have records, and Jane Rivard's amount of Indian blood I can track all the way down to my Indian blood, and it works perfectly. Yes, ma'am.
Didn't people also have to prove their bloodline in order to get recompensed for any of this money that was coming out of Oklahoma and various other states?
Well,
And
when you,
so much percentage in order to get head rights.
the head rights are controlled by the Minerals Council. The membership in the tribe is controlled by the Osage Nation tribe. So it's two different entities of the same group of people. So the head rights are closely controlled, and not closely enough in my opinion, but 25% are already gone. But the degree of Indian blood, they have records of the agency. If you go and say, I'm the grandson of Alex Tinker, they know exactly where to go and look. And they can approve you or disapprove you on the spot.
So are you one of the 24,000?
Yes,
All right, so you have head rights.
yes I do.
Good for you.
My head right came to me through my auntie, who was, well, let's see, she was one of 10 children. She had her own head right, but she also inherited her father's head right. How does that happen? She was the baby and she was spoiled rotten. So she got his and her own. So I ended up with one of those. Any more questions?
What percent do you have to be, like, is there a certain percent Osage to be a member of the tribe? Or-
I'm so happy you asked that question. No, you just have to prove you're any Osage. The degree of Indian blood is not used for anything. I get a benefits card from the tribe for $1,000 for drugs every year. They will refill my credit card. And other than that, because I don't live in Pawhuska, I don't have any other benefits. But if you lived in Pawhuska, there are lots of other things. They're building a huge new medical center there. They have specials on harvest land selling produce to the tribe. They have a ranch that produces beef for the tribe. They have a lot of things that are communal. But unless you're there, it doesn't do you any good. One more.
I read a little bit about the Osage tribe, and the traditions were so beautiful. I just was wondering if you could share one of them, like when a baby is born, or death, or...
When I'm not sure about the when babies are born. I don't know what the ritual is, but there's a wedding ceremony, and in the movie they showed Lily Gladstone wearing a wedding coat, which was a former military uniform in its previous life, and that's what they have adopted, and they use that design when they get married. Now, I did have a cousin who married fairly recently, and the ceremony was done by a member of the tribe, and it was lots of rituals were around it, but I wasn't there, so I don't know what happened. But when you die, there are various rituals that they do. You can ask for and get dusted with an eagle feather, which I had done by my uncle when he was living here in Houston at a private family dinner. But they will do that to the family when you're burying someone. And also, if you notice, I have a Pendleton blanket up here. Osage Tribe personally keeps Pendleton in business because we give a blanket for every possible occasion. So when my aunt and uncle were buried together, they were cremated, and there was this tiny little grave dug. The first thing that went in it was the Pendleton blanket, and then the 2 urns. So and then each member of the funeral party had an opportunity to put a spade of dirt on their grave to feel like this was final and this was the closing of their life.
What a terrific job. And let me tell you, she worked hard on this because we had about 80 slides. So she really focused on it. So we really appreciate everybody coming, and thank you for your support all year. We're looking forward to next year. We've already got 3 great lectures lined up. Jackie Bertrand is going to talk about Joan of Arc, Defender of the Faith and Champion for Liberty. And Luella Rausch is going to talk about Days for Girls, which is an international organization that sews washable menstrual pads, because this is a huge issue in developing countries. And then one of our oil and gas people, Skip Ward, is going to talk about his greatest achievements and his time in the petrochemical industry, going from 625 to 8,000 feet. I know they are much deeper now, but that was a big deal then. So thank you, and Christmas and Thanksgiving are so close to the 4th Tuesday that we will end the season now and pick up again in January. Thank you.
Thank you.